The peculiar, low-frequency hum that sometimes permeated Silas's old gas station on Highway 52 wasn't from any machinery he knew, yet it was undeniably present, a deep vibration that seemed to settle in the very air. What was its source, and why did it only manifest when he was there? Silas Thorne had owned and operated Silas's Stop and Go for nearly 40 years, a lifetime spent serving the trickle of travelers and the handful of locals along a forgotten stretch of rural America. His station was a beacon of yellow light in the vast, inky blackness of the Iowa night, a place where time often felt like it had slowed to a crawl. He prided himself on knowing every rattle and hum of his pumps, every groan of the old air compressor, every flick of the fluorescent lights. His station was an extension of himself, and he knew it intimately. But then there was that hum. It was unlike any mechanical sound, more akin to a resonant frequency, a sound you felt in your bones as much as heard with your ears. The first time Silas truly registered it was perhaps 15 years ago, on a crisp autumn night. A nondescript, charcoal gray sedan, a model he couldn't quite place, pulled up to pump number 3. Out stepped a man equally nondescript. Average height, average build, dressed in simple, dark clothing that seemed to absorb the light. His features were unremarkable, yet there was something about him that made Silas pause. As the man began to pump gas, a faint, almost imperceptible hum began to rise, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very ground beneath the station, yet vibrated through the air. Silas initially dismissed it as a distant semi-truck, or perhaps a new, unfamiliar resonance from the old pump. But the hum had a quality of stillness to it, a strange purity that didn't fit any conventional explanation. The man finished fueling, paid in cash, and departed without a word beyond a polite nod. As his taillights vanished down Highway 52, the hum dissipated as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind only the comforting, familiar silence of the rural night. Over the years, the man became a sporadic, almost spectral regular. He would appear every few months, sometimes late at night, sometimes just before dawn, always in the same unassuming vehicle, always to pump number 3. And always, without fail, the hum would return with him. Silas, a man of quiet observation, began to piece together the strange pattern. The man never seemed to age, his face remaining smooth and unlined even as Silas's own hairline receded and his hands grew more gnarled. His clothing, though always different in specific detail, maintained the same muted palette and classic, timeless style. He spoke only when necessary, his voice a low murmur, neither friendly nor unfriendly, simply present. He never asked for directions, never browsed the meager snack selection, never lingered. It was as if his sole purpose was the acquisition of fuel and the silent, inexplicable phenomenon that accompanied it. Silas, driven by a quiet curiosity, began his own private investigation. He checked the station's electrical systems, meticulously inspected the underground tanks, even called in an old friend, a retired electrician, to sweep for anomalies. Nothing. The hum registered on no equipment, appeared on no schematics. It was an auditory ghost, perceptible only to human ears, a phenomenon that seemed to defy physical measurement. One particularly cold winter night, as the man was filling his tank, Silas walked out, feigning a check on the pump. The hum was palpable then, a low thrumming that resonated in his chest. He looked closely at the man. His eyes, in the dim light of the station, held an unsettling depth, a peculiar stillness, as if they had witnessed far more than they should have, or perhaps far less. The night the mystery deepened furthest. The air was unusually still, heavy with an unspoken tension. As the charcoal sedan pulled up, the hum began, but this time it was different. It was stronger, more intense, filling the small station office with a subtle vibration that made the display on the old cash register flicker erratically. Silas watched from inside as the man inserted the nozzle into his tank. The digits on Pump 3's display began to cycle wildly, not counting gallons or dollars, but a nonsensical string of numbers and symbols, shifting too rapidly for the eye to follow. Then, just as suddenly, they snapped back to a perfectly normal, incrementing count. The man seemed utterly unfazed, his movements fluid and unhurried. Silas felt a prickle on his skin, a sense that something vast and immeasurable was brushing against the mundane fabric of his world. He wanted to call out, to ask something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. When the man came in to pay, he laid down a crisp $50 bill. Silas noticed a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer in the air around the man's hands, like heat haze on a summer road. As Silas made change, the hum reached a quiet crescendo, a deep chord that seemed to resonate with the very foundation of the building. The man took his change, nodded, and walked out. The moment his car pulled away from pump number 3, the hum vanished completely, leaving behind an unnatural, profound silence that seemed to swallow all sound. Silas never saw the man again after that night. The charcoal sedan, the quiet figure, the phantom hum, all became part of the station's folklore, a story he would occasionally recount to close friends, always with the same sense of bewildered wonder. Was it the hum that was strange, an unexplainable energy tied to a specific location, or was it the man himself, a strange vessel for an unknown phenomenon, a traveler perpetually out of step with time? Silas still wonders, watching the endless stream of headlights on Highway 52, knowing some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, lingering on the edges of our comprehension. The old gas station on the outskirts of Blackwood Creek, nestled amidst the dark whispers of the Black Forest, had a peculiar schedule. It was only truly open and bustling between midnight and dawn. What kind of business thrived in such nocturnal solitude? And what secrets did its lone attendant guard so fiercely? It stood off a seldom-used B road, a detour for those seeking a quiet passage through the ancient woods rather than the ceaseless rush of the Autobahn. For years, travelers, particularly long-haul truckers and weary night drivers, had spoken in hushed tones of Elias's midnight oasis. It wasn't its amenities that drew them, for it was a humble establishment, but rather Elias himself, the station's perpetually watchful attendant. Elias was a man of indeterminate age, his face a mosaic of fine lines that suggested both youthful vitality and ageless wisdom. He always wore a crisp, clean uniform of dark green, even at 3 a.m., and his movements were fluid, unhurried, as if he operated on a different temporal rhythm than the rest of the world. His eyes, though, were what people remembered most. A startling shade of pale blue, remarkably clear and seemingly capable of seeing into places most others could not. Her Anton Schmidt, a traveling salesman whose routes often took him through this region of Germany, first encountered Elias's midnight oasis 5 years ago by pure accident. Lost and low on fuel, he had stumbled upon its improbable glow. It was 2:17 a.m. He expected an automated pump or a sullen, half-asleep youth. Instead, the forecourt was immaculately lit, the pumps humming with a quiet efficiency, and Elias was standing by the cash register, seemingly expecting him. "Super Plus, I presume, Herr Schmidt?" Elias had asked, his voice a calm, resonant baritone, before Anton had even opened his mouth or swiped his card. Anton, flustered, had nodded, wondering how on earth the man knew his preferred fuel, let alone his name. The encounter was brief, polite, and unsettlingly precise. As he drove away, the encounter gnawed at him. Over the next few months, Anton found himself subconsciously, or perhaps compulsively, adjusting his route to pass by Elias's station. Each visit reinforced the unsettling familiarity. The dark roast, black, 2 sugars, Anton? Elias would query, holding up the exact cup before Anton had even reached the coffee machine. Or, your daughter's birthday is next week. Yes? You'll need that gift you left on the passenger seat. Don't forget it. Anton would invariably find the forgotten item or confirm the upcoming event, each instance sending a shiver down his spine. Elias never smiled broadly, never offered small talk beyond these unnerving observations. Yet his presence was comforting in its own strange, unwavering way. There was no judgment in his gaze, only a deep, abiding understanding. The station itself seemed frozen in time. The snack racks held the same brands of German chocolate and crisps, the same dated magazines, yet everything was always fully stocked, dust-free, and perfectly arranged. There were no flickering lights, no peeling paint, no signs of the wear and tear usually associated with a rural gas station open through the darkest hours. It was as if the passage of time simply bypassed this specific patch of asphalt and corrugated metal. Anton, a man grounded in the practicalities of sales and schedules, found this stasis deeply perplexing. He tried to visit during daylight hours once, driving by early in the morning, only to find the station shuttered, lights off, and an almost forlorn appearance, as if it had simply ceased to exist until the moon reclaimed the sky. One particularly foggy evening, Anton was driving back from a difficult client meeting, his mind heavy with the weight of a potential lost contract. He felt the familiar pull towards Elias's. As he pulled up to the pump, the station's yellow light seemed to cut through the thick fog like a beacon, the only clear thing in a world suddenly obscured. Elias was already at the register, his pale eyes luminous in the dim light. Anton entered, sighing, and began to list his purchases. Before he could finish, Elias interrupted, his voice softer than usual. "The contract," he began, not as a question. "It slipped through your fingers today, Anton. A regrettable outcome, but perhaps a necessary one. Sometimes the path we believe is lost is merely redirecting us to where we truly need to be." He paused, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond Anton's face. "The one you seek, the one who will truly change your fortunes, will arrive on Thursday. Not in Stuttgart, but in Mannheim." Anton felt a cold wave wash over him. He hadn't told anyone about the lost contract, let alone his despair. And Mannheim was nowhere on his itinerary for Thursday. He stared at Elias, a sudden, desperate urge to understand filling him. "How do you know these things, Elias?" he managed, his voice barely a whisper. Elias simply tilted his head, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "The currents of time, Herr Schmidt, they flow in many directions, sometimes overlapping, sometimes revealing their patterns to those who merely choose to observe." He then handed Anton his exact change, though Anton hadn't yet paid. Anton left that night in a daze. The fog outside seemed less a natural phenomenon and more a reflection of the muddled reality he now inhabited. He spent the next day wrestling with Elias's words, the chilling accuracy of the lost contract, the baffling prediction about Mannheim. Against his better judgment, driven by a deep, illogical compulsion, he rerouted his Thursday journey to include a stop in Mannheim. He found the client, not through any prearranged meeting, but through a serendipitous encounter at a cafe, a connection that indeed blossomed into the most significant partnership of his career. Anton never returned to Elias's midnight oasis. He tried once, weeks later, following the exact route, but the B-road seemed to lead only to a stretch of dark, unbroken forest. The gas station, Elias, the timeless calm. It was as if they had dissolved into the mist, leaving behind only the profound, unsettling question of what it means for someone to truly see the unfolding threads of time. Every night, just as the digital clock in the office of Big AL's fuel stop clicked over to precisely 3:33 a.m., a distinct, almost ethereal hum would briefly fill the air, only to vanish as quickly as it came. Was this just an old building settling? Or was something truly inexplicable occurring at pump number 4? Long after the last customer should have departed, Leo had worked the graveyard shift at Big AL's for 5 years, a solitary figure navigating the quiet hours between midnight and dawn. The station was a faded beacon on the edge of the Nevada desert, far enough from the city lights to feel utterly isolated, a place where the only constant sounds were the distant drone of passing semis on Highway 93 and the occasional whisper of the desert wind. Leo was a creature of habit, meticulous in his duties. He knew the creaks of the old building, the precise hum of the refrigerated drinks cooler, the rhythmic drip from the leaky faucet in the men's room. He was certain he locked the doors promptly at 2 a.m., the official closing time, and yet, the mystery of pump number 4 persisted. It began subtly, a faint metallic tang in the air by pump 4 around 4 a.m., even after Leo had swept and cleaned. Then came the small discrepancies. The pump's counter, reset to 0 at closing, would occasionally show a few cents of unregistered fuel dispensed. Too small for a drive-off, too consistent to be a random glitch. Leo initially blamed faulty wiring, or perhaps a mischievous local kid finding a way to sneak a few drops. But the pattern grew too precise, too ordered. It was always pump 4, always a small, unrecorded amount of gasoline, and always the faint smell of premium fuel, a type the station rarely sold. One particularly clear, moonless night, curiosity finally outweighed exhaustion. Leo, having locked up, decided to stay. He turned off all unnecessary lights, plunging the forecourt into near-total darkness, and settled into a chair by the grimy office window, a thermos of lukewarm coffee his only companion. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant hum of the desert. He watched the clock. 3:32 a.m. His eyes were fixed on pump number 4, a silent sentry. Then, at precisely 3:33 a.m., it happened. Not with a roar or a screech of tires, but with an impossible, almost spectral silence, a car materialized. It wasn't just any car. It was a gleaming, perfectly preserved 1957 Chevrolet Bel Air, its chrome glinting faintly in the sparse ambient light from the distant highway. The car was a deep, shimmering midnight blue, its lines impossibly clean, as if it had just rolled off the showroom floor. It glided to a halt at pump 4, its engine making no sound whatsoever, not even the faint tick of a cooling manifold. Leo's breath caught in his throat. He strained his eyes, pressing closer to the glass. The driver's side door opened, but no figure emerged fully. Instead, a hand, clad in a pristine white glove, reached out, took the nozzle, and inserted it into the car's fuel tank. There was no click of the pump activating, no whirring of the motor. The digits on the pump display simply began to climb, smoothly, silently, as if drawing from an invisible source. The faint, almost imperceptible hum that Leo had come to associate with the phenomenon was present now, a low, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the very air around the antique car. He watched, transfixed, as the counter stopped at exactly $33.33. The gloved hand smoothly returned the nozzle to its cradle. The car then glided away from the pump, making a silent turn, and vanished as eerily as it had appeared, leaving behind no tire tracks, no sound, only the faint, metallic scent of high-octane fuel and the lingering, inexplicable silence. Leo rushed outside, heart pounding. The pump was completely reset, the counter at 0. Nothing. No sign that anything had happened. This became Leo's strange, nocturnal ritual. Night after night, the Bel Air would appear, precisely at 3:33 a.m., silent, spectral, always at pump 4. He tried everything. He set up a cheap, motion-activated camera. The footage showed only static at the crucial moment. Then suddenly, a clear shot of an empty forecourt. He left a note at the pump. It was gone the next morning, but nothing replaced it. He even tried to step outside and confront it, but the moment his hand touched the door handle, the hum would intensify, a deep, unsettling thrum that seemed to warn him against interference, and the car would simply dematerialize. The mystery deepened when, one morning, after one such visitation, Leo found a single, perfectly smooth, obsidian-like stone resting on the pump's payment tray. It was cold to the touch and shimmered with an inner, almost liquid light. It wasn't money, but it felt like a deliberate, almost ceremonial exchange. He tried to research the car, the precise model, the peculiar stone. He found tales of ghost roads and phantom vehicles, but nothing that matched the chilling regularity and precise mechanics of his recurring visitor. The stone, he learned, was a type of volcanic glass, but its unnatural smoothness and cool temperature defied its terrestrial origin. One night, as the clockwork car filled silently at pump 4, Leo noticed something else. Through the rear window, faintly, he could discern what looked like an antique map laid out on the back seat, its lines glowing with a faint internal luminescence. And in the driver's seat, just before the car pulled away, he thought he saw a brief, fleeting reflection in the rearview mirror, not a face, but a swirling vortex of deep, cosmic purples and blues, like a distant galaxy. The hum intensified for a moment, a low, resonant chord that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the earth, then cut off sharply as the car silently departed. Leo never understood who or what drove the clockwork car. Was it a traveler from another time, fueled by some strange temporal energy? Or perhaps an echo, a fragment of a moment perpetually replaying, leaving behind a curious obsidian payment for its endless journey? The phenomenon continued, a silent, precise mystery in the vast quiet of the desert night, a secret known only to Leo and the old gas station, forever marked by the phantom arrival at 3:33 a.m. The dust-caked signs of the old Shell station, perched precariously on a quiet stretch of Highway 17 outside Savannah, seemed to shimmer in the late afternoon heat, but it was the arrival of a pristine, impossibly old car that truly made time feel disjointed. Who was the woman who drove it, always dressed in clothes from another era, and why did she consistently ask for directions to places that no longer existed? Sarah, a college student working the summer graveyard shift at Ollie's Shell, was well accustomed to the usual parade of weary truckers, vacationing families, and the occasional lost tourist. It was 1992, and the world felt modern, bustling. But the woman who pulled up in a gleaming, dark blue 1944 deluxe sedan introduced an element of profound anachronism. The car was immaculate, polished to a mirror sheen, its chrome glinting under the station's yellow lights. It moved with a quiet, almost unnatural grace, devoid of the rattles and groans expected from a vehicle of its age. The woman herself was equally striking. She was slender, with silver hair meticulously styled in waves that belonged to a bygone era. Her dress was a tailored, dark green frock, with small white gloves covering her hands. Her face, though unlined, carried an expression of quiet expectation, her eyes a startlingly clear shade of blue. She always approached the service window with a polite, almost formal demeanor. "Good evening," she would begin, her voice soft, with a distinct southern lilt that seemed to echo from the past. "Might you tell me the quickest route to Oak Haven Plantation? I understand they're hosting the annual county fair this week, and I'm quite keen to see the prize-winning preserves." Sarah, initially amused by the old-fashioned language, would politely explain that Oak Haven Plantation had burned down decades ago, replaced by a sprawling pecan orchard. The woman would simply nod, a faint, almost imperceptible frown touching her lips, then ask for a different long-lost landmark. Then perhaps the way to Miller's Meadow? I hear the town picnic is quite the event there today. Miller's Meadow, Sarah knew, was now the site of the bustling Savannah Lakes shopping mall, complete with a multiplex cinema. Each time, the woman would express a polite, almost detached disappointment, then proceed to fill her tank. The payment method was another layer of the enigma. She never used credit cards. Instead, she'd offer a handful of bills, always crisp, old-style silver certificates, or sometimes pre-1965 silver quarters, heavy and cool to the touch. Sarah, having a casual interest in numismatics, recognized them as legitimate but long out of common circulation. They were always the exact amount, never needing change, and often, their crispness felt unnatural, as if they had just been printed, not circulated for half a century. Sarah, intrigued and a little unnerved, began her own quiet research. She asked her grandmother, a lifelong resident of the area, about Oak Haven Plantation and Miller's Meadow. Her grandmother confirmed their existence and their long-ago demise, along with countless other local legends and forgotten landmarks. The description of the fair, the specific events, they all matched historical records from the 1930s and 40s. It was as if the woman was perpetually living a day from half a century ago. The encounters continued with an unsettling regularity, perhaps once every 2 or 3 weeks. The woman never looked directly at Sarah's name tag, yet she always used a respectful, slightly archaic phrase like "young lady" or "my dear." Her presence at the station never disturbed anything. She never left a trace, no stray receipt, no dropped coin, no oil stain from her antique car. The Ford Deluxe hummed, but never roared. It arrived silently and departed the same way, slipping back into the night as if it were simply a dream dissolving. One particularly humid August night, the station's single outdoor light flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. The Ford Deluxe pulled in, its polished surface catching and distorting the light. The woman approached the window, her expression more intent than usual. "Excuse me, young lady," she began, her voice a little more urgent. "Can you tell me how to get to the docks? There's a ship, the Belle of Savannah, departing for New York tonight, and I must be aboard. I'm afraid I've quite lost track of time." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. The Belle of Savannah was a passenger liner that had famously sunk off the coast of North Carolina during a hurricane in 1944. Her grandmother had told her stories about it, a local tragedy. "Ma'am," Sarah said, her voice strained, "the Belle of Savannah, it hasn't sailed in a very long time. It went down during the war." The woman's blue eyes seemed to widen infinitesimally, a flicker of something unreadable, confusion, recognition, profound sadness, passing through them. For a brief moment, the air around her seemed to ripple, like heat rising from asphalt, distorting her form just slightly. And then, as quickly as it came, the ripple vanished. Her face settled back into its usual composed, expectant look. "Oh," she simply said, the word a soft sigh. "How unfortunate. Thank you, then. I shall find another way." She purchased her fuel with a few perfectly preserved 1930s era dollar bills. As she turned to leave, Sarah noticed something peculiar. The flickering station light caught her in profile, and for a fleeting second, her shadow seemed to be subtly out of sync with her movements, almost a fraction of a second behind, like an imperfect echo. And then, as she stepped back into the Ford, she seemed to become momentarily translucent, the dark blue paint of the car visible through her arm, before solidifying once more. The woman drove away, the ancient car silently gliding into the darkness. Sarah never saw her again after that night. The old Shell station returned to its mundane rhythm of ordinary cars and predictable inquiries. But sometimes, when the light was just right, or the air particularly still, Sarah would catch a faint whiff of an old-fashioned perfume near pump number 2, where the Ford Deluxe always parked, and she would wonder if the woman was truly gone, or merely searching for another forgotten landmark, forever lost in the echoes of yesterday. Along a desolate stretch of Route 66 in Arizona, there stood a towering, weathered billboard advertising Pop's Diner and Auto Repair, a place that had closed down 20 years prior. But late one Tuesday night, under the stark light of a full moon, the billboard's image subtly, eerily changed. What was driving this impossible transformation, and how did it always seem to predict the next day's forgotten customers? Jack, a seasoned cross-country truck driver, had traveled Route 66 countless times over the last 3 decades. He knew every pothole, every abandoned motel, every faded sign. The old Pop's Diner billboard, with its peeling paint and faded depiction of a smiling mechanic holding a wrench, was a familiar, if melancholic, landmark. Pop's had been a thriving hub in the 70s and 80s, a place of greasy burgers and reliable repairs. But it had shut its doors for good in 2005, a victim of highway bypasses and changing times. Yet, the billboard remained, a ghost from a bygone era, its message now a poignant lie. One Tuesday night, while making his usual run from Flagstaff to Albuquerque, Jack pulled into the desolate, overgrown lot of a derelict gas station directly across from the billboard. He needed to stretch his legs and grab a few hours of sleep in his cab. The moonlight was exceptionally bright, illuminating the old sign with an almost theatrical glow. As he leaned against his rig, taking a long sip from his thermos, he noticed something. The smiling mechanic on the billboard, usually depicted with a generic, kindly face, seemed to have shifted. His eyes, previously a uniform blank, now held a faint, almost imperceptible gleam, and his smile seemed a fraction wider, more knowing. Jack blinked, rubbed his eyes. Must be the moonlight playing tricks, he thought, or just exhaustion. The next morning, as the sun began to warm the desert, Jack awoke and glanced across at the billboard. He nearly choked on his coffee. The mechanic on the sign was no longer generic. He now clearly resembled Old Man Peterson, a grizzled, taciturn trucker Jack had known years ago, famous for his bright red cap and a distinctive scar above his left eyebrow. And the wrench in the mechanic's hand was not just a generic tool. It was Peterson's specific, custom-made adjustable wrench, easily identifiable by a notch carved into its handle. More unsettling still, the entire sign, though still weathered, looked slightly more vibrant, as if a layer of grime had been subtly lifted. Jack knew, with a certainty that chilled him, that this was impossible. He had taken a photo of the billboard just weeks ago, and it had been its usual faded self. Over the next few months, Jack began to observe the billboard with a mixture of dread and morbid fascination. He deliberately adjusted his schedule to pass by on Tuesday nights, the night he suspected the change occurred. And each Wednesday morning, he found the image subtly altered, depicting a new, familiar stranger. One week, it was a woman with a distinctive beehive hairstyle who used to run a coffee stand at a now-demolished rest stop. Another time, it was a grizzled biker with a specific tattoo of a coiled snake on his forearm, a man Jack had briefly met at a rally decades ago. The detail was uncanny, specific to the individual, down to their clothing or a particular accessory. And here was the truly bizarre part. Almost without fail, within the next 24 to 48 hours, Jack would encounter the actual person depicted on the billboard. They would pull into the same derelict gas station lot for a break, or he'd see them at a truck stop further down the road, always in the exact attire or with the specific item shown on the billboard. The people were often older now, sometimes frail, but unmistakably the same individuals. And they never seemed to notice the billboard, or if they did, they saw only its original, faded form. Jack would try to engage them, subtly, "Hey, remember Pop's Diner?" And they'd nod vaguely, often with a wistful look. "Oh yeah, good place. Been closed a long time." They never recognized their own image or the impossible details. The station across the road from the billboard, though long abandoned, always felt different after a change. The air around the pumps seemed to hum with a faint, almost electrical charge. Sometimes Jack would find a single, inexplicable object left on the dusty ground near the old fuel island. A perfectly preserved vintage matchbook from a long-defunct restaurant, or a shiny, uncirculated coin from the 1960s. These items felt like tokens, silent offerings left by the unseen force at work. The most unnerving transformation occurred one night when Jack, more exhausted than usual, pulled over earlier than planned. It was a Tuesday. As he drifted off to sleep, he glanced at the billboard, and for a split second before his eyes closed, he saw the image begin to ripple, the colors shifting, the lines blurring as if painted on water. He jolted awake hours later, his heart thudding. It was early morning. He looked at the billboard, and a cold dread seized him. The mechanic on the sign was now unmistakably him. It wasn't a perfect likeness, but the distinctive shape of his hat, the way his beard curled, the very set of his shoulders. It was all there. And in the mechanic's hand, clutched precisely, was the thermos of coffee Jack had been holding just hours earlier. Jack felt a profound chill, a sense of being seen, understood, and somehow anticipated. He got back in his rig, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. He drove. He didn't stop until he was hundreds of miles away, the sun high in the sky. He never drove that stretch of Route 66 again on a Tuesday night. He still wonders about the billboard, about the invisible artist and its uncanny predictions. Was it simply a localized temporal anomaly, drawing echoes of the past into the present? Or was something more deliberate at play? A silent chronicler of the road, manifesting forgotten travelers, perhaps even orchestrating their paths? A subtle, unsettling reminder that along the lonely highways, some things are never truly gone, only waiting to be remembered? The first time the antique Cadillac glided into the desolate gas station on the edge of the Nevada Salt Flats, Thomas was certain his eyes were playing tricks on him, for there was no one, absolutely no one, behind the wheel. How did such a magnificent machine propel itself? Who was its phantom occupant? And what exactly was it truly fueling from pump number 5? Thomas had taken the graveyard shift at Desert Stop, a lonely outpost of flickering fluorescent lights and a single ancient gas pump, precisely because of its profound quiet. After years of urban noise, the vast, echoing silence of the Nevada desert was a balm to his soul. Most nights, his only company was the occasional trucker rumbling through, or the distant howl of a coyote. The station, a relic from the 1970s, had seen better days, but its isolation meant a steady, if sparse, clientele of those truly in need. It was 2:47 a.m., according to the dusty clock above the register, when the Cadillac appeared. It wasn't just any car. It was a pristine, impossibly flawless 1972 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, its deep emerald green paint gleaming under the harsh station lights as if freshly waxed. Thomas watched from inside as it turned off the highway, moving with an almost preternatural smoothness, without the usual low growl of a powerful V8 engine. It simply glided, silently, to pump number 5. Thomas, an old hand at recognizing oddities of the road, frowned. This car was a museum piece, maintained to perfection. But as it came to a complete stop, he squinted, pressing his face closer to the smudged glass. The driver's side window was tinted, but surely he should see a silhouette, a headrest, something. There was nothing. The seat appeared empty. A strange chill snaked up his spine. Had someone leaned down, perhaps? Or was this some elaborate prank? He watched, transfixed, as the pump's nozzle, seemingly on its own accord, lifted from its cradle. No hand was visible. It hovered for a moment, then inserted itself into the car's fuel tank with a soft, almost inaudible click. The pump's display, usually sluggish to start, immediately began ticking upwards, counting gallons and dollars with a brisk, unnatural efficiency. There was no telltale gurgle of fuel flowing, only the faint hum of the pump itself, almost imperceptible over the desert wind. Thomas rubbed his eyes. He must be dreaming, or perhaps the loneliness of the night was finally getting to him. After a few minutes, the pump clicked off, stopping precisely at $44.44. The nozzle slowly withdrew, returned itself to its cradle, and the car's fuel cap clicked shut. Still no one. Then, with the same impossible silence with which it arrived, the Cadillac glided away from the pump, made a wide, elegant turn, and vanished into the darkness of the highway, leaving no sound, no tire marks, nothing but the faint, lingering scent of ozone, rather than gasoline, hanging in the air. Thomas stood dumbfounded. The mundane reality of his gas station shift suddenly fractured. The next night, he told Al, the station owner, a gruff man who believed only in profit margins and the reliability of his vintage soda machine. Al laughed, clapped him on the shoulder, and told him to lay off the late-night coffee. But the following week, at precisely the same time, the Emerald Cadillac returned. This time, Thomas was ready. He had his phone ready to record, positioned discreetly. He watched as the same silent ritual unfolded. He hit record, but the screen flickered, then went black for the duration of the refueling, only to spring back to life the moment the car was gone, showing only the empty forecourt. As the encounters continued over the ensuing months, a pattern emerged. The Cadillac always appeared between 2:45 a.m. and 3 a.m. It always pulled up to pump number 5, and it always took precisely $44.44 worth of fuel. Thomas, growing bolder, tried to get closer. One night, as the phantom car was fueling, he stepped out onto the forecourt, feigning a check on the other pumps. The air around the Cadillac felt strangely cold, almost static, despite the warmth of the desert night. He peered into the tinted windows, heart pounding. He could see the gleam of the leather seats, the polished wood dashboard, the intricate details of the interior, all immaculate. But no driver, not even a hint of a shadow. It was perfectly, utterly empty. He extended a hand towards the door handle, drawn by an irresistible urge to touch, to confirm its solidity. Just as his fingers brushed the cool metal, a faint, almost musical chime resonated from within the car, a sound that seemed to vibrate directly in his chest, and the fuel nozzle instantly retracted, the car gliding away. The mystery deepened when Thomas noticed the anomalies on the pump itself. While the display showed a consistent, rising dollar amount, the internal sensor, which tracked actual fuel dispensed, would show only a fraction of that amount, or sometimes, bizarrely, a negative number. And the station's primary fuel tanks weren't diminishing at the rate they should, given the cumulative sales to the Cadillac. What was it actually drawing? Thomas had once sampled the faint residue left on Pump 5's nozzle after a visit. It smelled of something metallic, sharp, and slightly sweet, completely unlike gasoline. It was a scent that brought to mind faint memories of old electrical machinery, or perhaps even distant starlight. One particularly intense night, A strong electrical storm had been brewing on the horizon, painting the sky with silent lightning flashes. The Cadillac arrived amidst the distant thunder, its emerald paint seeming to absorb and amplify the brief flashes of light. This time, as it fueled, the station lights around Pump 5 flickered violently, and a deep, resonant hum, far louder than usual, filled the air. Thomas, leaning against the counter, saw something new. Through the tinted glass of the driver's side window, a faint iridescent shimmer began to coalesce, like heat haze, taking on a vaguely humanoid form. It wasn't solid, but a shimmering, shifting outline of light, pulsing with the same ozone scent. As the pump clicked off, and the iridescent form seemed to briefly intensify, Thomas heard it then, a whisper clear as day, yet seemingly emanating from within his own mind. The journey continues beyond the veil. Then the shimmer dissolved, the loud hum cut out, and the Cadillac glided away, silent and unburdened, leaving Thomas trembling. He never saw the iridescent form again, nor did he hear the voice. The Cadillac continued its silent, driverless visits, the hum returning to its usual subtle thrum, the fuel amount always $44.44. Thomas still works the graveyard shift at Desert Stop, forever watching pump number 5. He doesn't understand who or what drives the Emerald Cadillac, or what fuel it truly consumes. Is it an echo from another dimension, a complex energy construct, or a soul perpetually searching for a way home, drawing sustenance from the very fabric of the desolate highway? The silence of the desert keeps its secrets well, and the driverless car remains one of its most profound. The old gas station on the outskirts of Dartmoor, a desolate, fog-shrouded expanse of England, had a worn, tattered road map tacked to its notice board for as long as anyone could remember. But over the particularly bleak winter of '98, subtle, impossible changes began to appear on its faded surface. What was altering the map, and why did its new, phantom roads seem to appear just hours before genuine, though long-forgotten, paths were discovered? Gareth Davies had owned the Dartmoor Stop and Go for nearly 20 years. His station was a solitary point of light in the vast, often impenetrable darkness of the moor, a place where the weather could change in an instant and ancient legends felt as real as the biting wind. Local lore was rich with tales of shifting bogs, lost travelers, and spectral lights. Gareth, a man of quiet stoicism, usually dismissed such talk as superstitious nonsense, preferring the solid reality of petrol prices and tire pressure. His only concession to the station's history was the old, large-format road map pinned behind the counter, a relic from the 1950s, its folds softened by countless touchings, its colors faded to sepia tones. It covered the entirety of Devon, and many a lost tourist had relied on it over the years. The first hint of something amiss came on a night of particularly thick fog, so dense it seemed to swallow the station whole. A young couple, clearly lost and visibly shaken, stumbled in, recounting a terrifying experience of driving down a road that suddenly vanished behind them, leaving them stranded in an unfamiliar, boggy landscape. Gareth, accustomed to tales of moorland disorientation, offered them a hot tea and pointed to the map. "You were likely on the old track to Grimpen Mire," he'd said, tracing a long-disused path that only locals remembered. But as his finger touched the map, he paused. A faint, almost imperceptible line seemed to have been drawn on the map, a new, thin red line, leading directly into the heart of what should have been an impassable, unmarked bog. He blinked. It must be his imagination, a trick of the light. He pointed them in the right direction, and they left, still unnerved. The next morning, the red line was still there, a faint, almost ghostly addition to the aged paper. Gareth dismissed it as a rogue pen mark from a previous customer. But then, a few days later, a local rambler reported an astonishing discovery. A long-forgotten Roman road, previously thought to be completely submerged, had become visible after a heavy downpour, precisely where that faint red line appeared on the map. It was a local sensation, reported in the regional papers. Gareth felt a prickle of unease. Over the next few weeks, the anomalies on the map became undeniable. New lines, sometimes faint red, sometimes a barely visible blue, would appear overnight. These lines weren't random. They always depicted paths, ancient tracks, or forgotten lanes that were not on any modern map, and certainly not on this 1950s original. And each time, within days, sometimes hours, some archaeological dig, some sudden shift in the moor's peat, or even a local farmer's accidental discovery, would reveal the exact path marked on Gareth's map. He saw the addition of a forgotten medieval drover's track, a Roman military road, even the winding, narrow path to a stone circle believed to be mere legend. Gareth began to observe the map obsessively. He tried marking the new lines with a pencil, but the pencil marks would be absorbed by the paper, vanishing by morning, leaving the map's own mysterious lines undisturbed. He even tried covering the map with a sheet of clear plastic, but the changes seemed to manifest beneath the plastic, as if the map itself were alive, slowly, meticulously rewriting its own history. The texture of the paper, already brittle with age, sometimes felt subtly different around the new lines, smoother, almost silken. The shifts in style were unsettling. Sometimes a new path would appear as a finely drawn, almost microscopic line. Other times it would be a broader, bolder stroke, as if sketched by a hurried hand. Occasionally, an entire small circular mark, like a compass point, would materialize over a specific, isolated standing stone or a particularly ancient, gnarled tree, indicating places of deep, almost mystical significance that were known only to a handful of local historians. The atmosphere in the gas station office would change slightly on the nights the map was active. The air would grow still and heavy. The scent of damp earth and ancient stone seemed to permeate the air, even indoors. One blustery evening, a new, thick blue line appeared directly across the infamous Whispering Bog, a section of Dartmoor known for its treacherous, unstable ground where many had disappeared over the centuries. This particular line was unlike any before it. It seemed to glow faintly, almost pulsing with a soft luminescence. Gareth, filled with a premonition, checked the local news feeds. A severe storm was predicted for the next 24 hours. As he stared at the map, the new blue line solidified, seeming to sink into the paper, becoming an indelible part of its fabric. And then, for the first time, a small, faded, almost imperceptible image materialized beside the line. A ghostly, horse-drawn carriage, its form translucent, appearing to be stuck in the mire. A few hours later, the storm hit with a ferocity that seemed to shake the very foundations of the station. Emergency services were swamped. And then came the reports. A flash flood had temporarily drained a section of the Whispering Bog, revealing, for the first time in over a century, the remarkably preserved remains of an old, horse-drawn coach, eerily similar to the one depicted on the map, mired deep in the peat. It was a historical discovery that stunned local archaeologists. Gareth never understood the map. Was it a conduit to the past, a living historical record, or a preternatural almanac, anticipating shifts in the very landscape of Dartmoor? The blue line and the ghostly coach remained on the map, a silent, unsettling testament to that night. The map still hangs behind the counter at Dartmoor Stop and Go, occasionally adding a new, faint line, a subtle reminder that the ancient world often bleeds into the modern, and that some maps don't merely guide you, but rather reveal the deepest, most hidden truths of the land. The digital display on Pump 3 at Riverside Fuel Stop in rural Oregon often flickered, But one sweltering summer night, it didn't just flicker, it vanished, along with the very existence of the customer who had just paid. Where did the transaction go? And what happened to the quiet man who had just stood right there? Ethan worked the night shift at Riverside Fuel Stop, a 24-hour establishment nestled beside the rushing currents of the Deschutes River. His duties were largely monotonous. Stock shelves, clean restrooms, and process transactions. The station's old POS system was temperamental, prone to freezing, but it always eventually caught up. Ethan relied on its receipts to keep track of sales, a tangible record in the quiet hours. It was a particularly oppressive August night, the air thick and still, the only sound the distant rush of the river. Around 1:30 a.m., a car pulled up to pump number 3. It was a nondescript, older model sedan, painted a faded shade of green. A man emerged, average in height and build, wearing a plain, slightly worn denim jacket and dark trousers. He moved with a quiet, almost deliberate stillness, his face partially obscured by the shadow of a baseball cap. He filled his tank, slowly, deliberately, the click-click-click of the pump the only sound. When he entered the station office, he walked straight to the counter. His eyes, though shadowed by the cap, seemed to hold a peculiar, depthless quality, like looking into a very still, dark pond. "Just the gas, please," he murmured, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, barely audible over the hum of the refrigerated drinks cooler. He paid in cash, a handful of crisp, new-looking $100 bills. Ethan processed the transaction, the old machine whirring and grinding as it printed the receipt. The man waited patiently, taking the receipt, folding it meticulously, and tucking it into the front pocket of his jacket. "Thank you," he said, the whisper unchanged, and turned to leave. Ethan watched him go, noting the quiet way he moved, almost gliding rather than walking. The green sedan started without a sound, pulled away, and vanished into the inky blackness of the highway. As soon as the taillights disappeared, Ethan turned back to the register to start the end-of-shift reconciliation. He pulled up the transaction history. Nothing. The sale for Pump 3, the one he had just completed moments ago, was completely absent. It wasn't just missing from the printout. It wasn't in the digital log, the daily summary, or the pump's own internal counter. It was as if it had never happened. Ethan, initially frustrated, assumed the old POS system had finally given up the ghost. He tried to manually re-enter the sale, but there was no record of the fuel being dispensed from Pump 3 at all. He checked the gas tank's levels. They showed the expected reduction, confirming the fuel had indeed been pumped. The money was still in the cash drawer, the crisp $100 bills exactly where he'd put them. But the digital footprint of the transaction and any record of the man had been erased. Over the next few weeks, the phenomenon repeated itself. The faded green sedan would reappear, always at Pump 3, always between 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. The quiet man would emerge, pay in crisp, new hundreds, take his receipt, and vanish. And each time, after his departure, the transaction would be gone from the system, leaving only the physical cash and the mysterious reduction in the fuel tanks. Ethan tried everything. He moved the register closer to the window, hoping to get a better look at the man. He tried to strike up a conversation, but the man always politely, softly, deflected any attempts, keeping his answers minimal. He felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling of dealing with something that simply did not conform to the rules of his reality. One night, determined to catch the elusive proof, Ethan positioned a small, discreet security camera directly above Pump 3. As the man finished fueling and approached the counter, Ethan leaned forward, feigning a problem with the receipt paper, trying to get a clear view of his face. The man remained impassive, his features still shadowed by the cap. As Ethan handed him the receipt, He noticed something peculiar about the man's hands. They seemed to absorb the light, almost like black holes, the crisp $100 bills looking unnaturally bright in comparison. Just as the man took the receipt, the station's lights flickered violently, plunging the office into momentary darkness. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper seemed to emanate from the man's direction. A wordless sigh that felt ancient, impossibly old. When the lights flickered back on, the man was gone. Not just out the door, but gone. As if he had simply dematerialized in the instant of darkness. Ethan rushed outside. The green sedan was still there, parked silently at pump 3, but it too was empty, the driver's door ajar. And then, as he watched, the car itself seemed to shimmer, the green paint briefly dissolving into a swirling vortex of deep, dark colors, before solidifying back into the faded sedan. Then, with a silent surge, it pulled away and vanished down the highway. Ethan ran back inside, his heart pounding. He checked the security camera. The footage showed the man approaching the counter, taking the receipt, the lights flickering, and then an empty space where the man had been. The transition was instantaneous, seamless, as if the camera itself couldn't capture the moment of his vanishing. He checked the POS system. The transaction was, as always, gone. The man, the green sedan, the vanishing receipt, they were never seen at Riverside fuel stop again. Ethan still works the night shift, but the quiet of the desert no longer feels like a bomb. It feels like a canvas for the unseen, a place where reality is fluid, and where certain travelers leave no trace, save for the memory of a whisper, and the uncounted cash left mysteriously behind. What was the man? A transient echo of energy, a visitor from another plane, or a silent custodian of forgotten routes? Ethan remains, forever wondering what it means for someone to simply pass through, leaving no imprint on the world, and taking their transaction with them beyond the veil of ordinary existence. At a small, isolated gas station tucked away in the Scottish Highlands, a particular fuel pump, number 7, had a strange reputation. It occasionally played a faint, melancholic tune, audible only to certain ears. But when the melody began to grow clearer, and even stranger, accompanied by an eerie glow, what was truly calling from within the earth, and to whom? Hamish MacLeod had inherited MacLeod's Rest from his grandfather, a small, unassuming gas station and convenience store that served the sparse traffic winding through the remote glens of the Scottish Highlands. The station was old, its pumps rusty, but the surrounding landscape of rolling hills, ancient stone, and mist-shrouded lochs lent it an almost mythical quality. Hamish, a pragmatic man with a healthy respect for his ancestors' folklore, had always dismissed the local whispers of singing stones and whispering winds. But then there was the phenomenon of pump number 7. For years it had been a quirky local anecdote. Customers would occasionally mention hearing a faint, almost inaudible tune when they filled up at pump 7. It was always described as melancholic, like an old, sorrowful folk song, sometimes accompanied by the faint scent of peat smoke. Most dismissed it as the wind or imagination, or perhaps the creaks of an old machine. Hamish himself had only ever heard it once or twice, and even then he put it down to fatigue. However, over the past few months the melody had become undeniable. It was clearer now, a distinct, haunting tune played on what sounded like a fiddle, or perhaps an ancient pipes chanter. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakably there, emanating from the very ground around pump 7, and it seemed to be growing stronger. The first time Hamish genuinely paid attention was on a quiet, moonlit night when a young couple, tourists clearly unnerved, rushed into his shop. "Did you hear that?" the woman whispered, her eyes wide. "The music from the pump. It's like a lament." The man nodded, pale. and there was a faint blue light, just under the ground. Hamish, intrigued despite himself, walked out to Pump 7. The music was undeniable now, a beautiful, mournful tune that spoke of ancient sorrows and forgotten battles. And there it was, a faint, cool blue glow emanating from the cracked concrete around the base of the pump, pulsing softly in time with the melody. Hamish, a man who believed in the tangible, tried to find a rational explanation. He checked the pump's electrical wiring, its underground pipes, the fuel tanks. Nothing amiss. He even brought in an old friend, a retired geologist, who found no unusual seismic activity. Yet, the music persisted, and the blue glow, though subtle, intensified whenever the melody grew stronger. It seemed to be at its most resonant when the moon was full or during a particularly heavy mist. Customers began to comment more frequently. Some were fascinated, even moved by the strange music. Others were deeply unsettled, claiming the melody felt intensely personal, as if it were mourning something specific within them. One elderly woman, a local who rarely spoke, left her car running and rushed into the shop, trembling. "It's the old ways," she whispered to Hamish, her eyes fixed on the pump. "The land remembers. It's calling to its own." The mystery deepened when Hamish noticed a strange correlation. The melody seemed to react to certain individuals. Some people, like the elderly woman, would cause the music to swell, becoming richer and more profound. For others, it remained a faint whisper, or was entirely silent. He observed that those who triggered the strongest response often seemed to have a deep connection to the land, or perhaps, unknown to them, carried a lineage tied to the ancient history of the Highlands. He began to think of the pump not as a machine, but as a kind of conduit, a receiver or transmitter for something much older, much deeper. One evening, as a thick, swirling mist descended upon the station, a lone piper pulled up to Pump 7. He was an old man, his face weathered by the Highland winds, and he carried a set of well-worn bagpipes. As he began to fill his tank, the melancholic tune from Pump 7 swelled, becoming incredibly clear, almost as if the fiddle and pipes were playing in harmony. And the blue glow intensified, spreading beyond the pump, bathing the old piper and his car in an ethereal light. The piper stopped, his hands still on the nozzle, and his head tilted, listening intently. He then reached for his own pipes, adjusted them, and began to play a slow, haunting countermelody, joining the phantom tune emanating from the ground. The two melodies, the one from the earth and the one from the piper's pipes, wove together, creating a sound of such profound beauty and sorrow that it brought tears to Hamish's eyes. The blue light pulsed, brightened, and then, slowly, seemed to coalesce around the base of Pump 7, forming a faint, shimmering outline of what looked like an ancient, standing stone, momentarily visible before fading. The piper finished his tune, a single tear tracking down his cheek. He quietly filled the rest of his tank, paid, and left without a word, his eyes holding a distant, knowing look. After that night, the melody from Pump 7 grew quieter. It didn't disappear entirely, but it became, once again, the faint, melancholic whisper Hamish had first heard years ago, reserved for only the most attuned ears. The blue glow became almost imperceptible. Hamish still works at MacLeod's Rest, forever listening to the subtle whispers of the land. He doesn't know what caused the phenomenon, or why it chose Pump 7 as its voice. Was it the echoes of ancient music trapped within the earth, a geological memory of the Highlands' turbulent past? Or perhaps something more ethereal, a silent communication from the very spirit of the land, briefly finding a channel through the most mundane of modern conveniences? The Highlands keep their secrets well, and the endless tune of Pump 7 remains one of its most enigmatic. At a dimly lit gas station deep in the Arizona desert, the antique grandfather clock in the back office, long since broken, inexplicably chimed at odd, irregular intervals. But during these chimes, the world outside seemed to freeze, only to resume its motion as if nothing had happened, leaving behind a profound sense of disorientation. What was happening during these frozen moments, and who or what was subtly manipulating the flow of time itself? Clara had been running Desert Bloom Gas and Grub for nearly a decade, a 24-hour oasis for weary travelers on the lonely stretch of highway between Phoenix and Las Vegas. Her station was unremarkable, save for the large, ornate grandfather clock that stood in a dusty corner of the office, a relic left by the previous owner. It had stopped working years ago, its hands permanently fixed at 11:11, its pendulum still. Clara paid it no mind. It was just part of the furniture. The first time it happened, she was serving a truck driver named Hank, a regular with a booming laugh. He was telling her about a close call he'd had with a jackrabbit when the old clock suddenly, impossibly chimed. Not a full sequence, but a single resonant bong that vibrated through the small room. In that instant, Hank froze mid-sentence, a half-smile on his face, his eyes glassy and still. Outside the window, a car pulled up to pump 2, its driver frozen with the nozzle in hand, a trickle of gas suspended in the air. The desert wind, usually a constant presence, fell silent. The hum of the refrigerators died. Everything, for what felt like an eternity, became utterly, terrifyingly still. Clara, inexplicably, was unaffected. She could move, breathe, think. She walked around the frozen truck driver, his smile fixed, his gaze vacant. She looked outside, seeing the world trapped in a tableau. She even walked to the counter, picked up a pen, and tried to write. Her hand moved, the pen wrote, but the ink on the paper remained wet, refusing to dry. It was as if time itself had ceased to advance for everyone and everything but her. She reached out and touched Hank's arm. It was cold, unnaturally so, like marble. Then, with another sudden bong from the grandfather clock, the world snapped back into motion. Hank finished his sentence, his laugh booming, completely unaware of the interlude. The car outside resumed fueling, the suspended gasoline hitting the tank with a sudden splash. The wind picked up, the refrigerators hummed. Everything was as it had been, save for Clara's racing heart and the profound sense of disquiet settling within her. She glanced at the clock. Its hands were still at 11:11, its pendulum motionless. These frozen moments became a sporadic, unsettling reality. They would happen every few days, sometimes in the dead of night, sometimes in the bustling afternoon. The duration varied, sometimes just a few seconds, sometimes what felt like minutes. But always, it was initiated and ended by a single, impossible chime from the broken clock. And always, Clara was the only one who seemed to experience the pause, the only one to witness the world caught in suspended animation. She tried to understand it. She unplugged the clock, but it still chimed. She removed its internal mechanisms, yet it still resonated with its impossible bongs. It was as if the clock itself was merely a symbol, a focal point for something far greater, a temporal anomaly rooted in the very fabric of the building, or perhaps the desert itself. During these frozen moments, the air would become incredibly dry, almost metallic, and a faint, sweet smell, like ozone and dust, would fill the office. The strangest aspect was the subtle, almost imperceptible changes she would notice after each event. A misplaced item on a shelf would be back in its original spot. A half-eaten sandwich left by a customer would be whole again. Once, she even found a small, antique silver locket lying on the floor, one that definitely hadn't been there before the freeze. When she opened it, it was empty, but it felt warm to the touch. It was as if during these pauses, the timeline was not just halted, but subtly rewritten, or perhaps nudged. One particularly busy afternoon, the clock chimed again. A line of cars was at the pumps, customers were browsing inside. The world froze. Clara felt the familiar rush of disembodied presence. She looked at the frozen figures, their faces caught in expressions of impatience or boredom. This time, she noticed something new. In the frozen reflection of the glass door, she saw not just herself, but a faint, shimmering outline standing behind her. A tall, slender figure, almost translucent, its form shifting like heat haze. It seemed to be looking at the frozen scene, its head tilted in what felt like contemplation. It had no discernible features, just an outline, made of what looked like pure, shimmering light. As the second bong reverberated, and time snapped back to normal, Clara spun around. Nothing. Just the mundane reality of her gas station, the sounds of traffic, the chatter of customers. But on the floor, where the shimmering figure had stood, was the antique silver locket, its warmth palpable, and inside it, a tiny, perfectly preserved dried flower, unlike anything she had ever seen in the desert. Clara still runs desert bloom gas and grub. The old clock still sits in the corner, its hands at 11:11, and it still, occasionally, rings its impossible chime. She no longer fears the frozen moments. She simply observes, a silent witness to the subtle manipulations of time. Who or what was the shimmering figure? A time traveler? A guardian of the timeline? Or simply a manifestation of the desert's ancient secrets? The desert keeps its secrets well, and the old clock continues to tick, not seconds, but moments of profound, inexplicable stillness. On a lonely stretch of Interstate 80 in Nebraska, a beat-up sedan, always the same make and model, would pull into the Prairie Stop gas station, but its lone, elderly male driver would consistently ask for fuel not for his car, but for the perpetually sleeping woman in the passenger seat. Who was this silent companion, and why did the driver believe she was the one consuming the gasoline? Hank had run Prairie Stop for nearly 30 years, a modest gas station and convenience store that stood like a beacon in the vast, flat expanse of the Nebraska plains. His clientele was mostly long-haul truckers and families on cross-country road trips. He'd seen every type of traveler, every kind of vehicle, but none puzzled him quite like the faded, dark blue 1970s Ford Fairmont that showed up like clockwork every 3 months. The car was always immaculate despite its age. Not a speck of dust on its paint, its chrome glinting. Behind the wheel was an elderly man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes a weary, distant blue. He always wore the same neatly pressed, but clearly old tweed jacket. But it was his passenger who truly captured Hank's attention. An elderly woman, equally well-dressed, perpetually asleep in the passenger seat. Her head was always gently tilted against the window, a serene, almost porcelain expression on her face. Her breathing was so shallow as to be imperceptible, and she never, not once, stirred. The man, who always introduced himself simply as Mr. Silas, would approach the counter with a quiet dignity. "Good evening, sir," he'd begin, his voice soft, almost a whisper, yet clear. "Fuel for her, please. She's had a long journey." He would then gesture vaguely towards the sleeping woman in the car. Hank, initially confused, would try to clarify. "For the car, sir?" he'd ask, indicating the pumps. "No, no," Silas would reply, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "For her. She consumes a great deal. Always has. It's a matter of sustenance for the journey, you understand." He would then pay in cash, always the exact amount, in crisp, old-style bills, often $5 or $10 denominations that looked as if they'd just come from the mint. despite their dated appearance. Hank would pump the gas, always at pump number 6, as Silas specifically requested. As the fuel flowed into the Fairmont's tank, Hank would occasionally glance at the sleeping woman. Her stillness was absolute, her chest barely rising. Yet, sometimes when the nozzle clicked off, Hank swore he could see a faint, almost ethereal glow, a ripple of shimmering light, emanating from around her form, lasting only a fraction of a second before vanishing. And a faint, sweet, almost floral scent, unlike any gasoline, would momentarily fill the air around the passenger side of the car. He tried to engage Silas in conversation about her. "Your wife, sir?" he once asked gently. Silas merely smiled, a distant, knowing look in his eyes. "My eternal companion," he replied, his gaze returning to the sleeping woman. "She's been with me since the very beginning of the road." The encounters continued over the years, unchanging. The Fairmont never seemed to age, never acquired a dent or a scratch. Silas never looked older than his initial appearance. His face etched with the same weary lines, his eyes holding the same distant blue. The woman remained perpetually asleep, perfectly still, radiating an aura of profound peace. Hank, a practical man, considered various explanations. Was she ill, perhaps in a coma, kept alive by some strange, unseen apparatus in the car? Was it a mannequin, an elaborate prop for a man deep in the throes of delusion? But the ethereal shimmer, the floral scent, and the man's profound conviction always dismissed the simpler explanations. One particularly harsh winter night, a blizzard raged, coating the plains in a thick blanket of snow. Hank was about to close early when the familiar Fairmont, its headlights cutting through the swirling flakes, pulled into the station. Silas emerged, a fine layer of snow dusting his tweed jacket. "A difficult night," he murmured, his breath pluming in the cold air. "She requires extra today." As Hank began to pump the fuel into the car, the blizzard seemed to intensify around pump number 6, forming a strange, swirling vortex of snow and wind. The floral scent, usually faint, became overwhelming, almost intoxicating. And then, Hank saw it clearly. As the fuel flowed, a vibrant, crystalline glow, like millions of tiny diamonds, seemed to emanate directly from the sleeping woman. It wasn't just a shimmer. It was a steady, luminous emanation that seemed to draw the light from the station's lamps into itself. He looked at Silas. The old man was watching the woman, a look of profound tenderness and sorrow on his face. Then, for the first time, the woman stirred. Her eyes, a startling, deep emerald green, fluttered open. She looked directly at Hank, a fleeting expression of ancient weariness. And then, slowly, a faint, almost transparent smile touched her lips. She raised a delicate, almost translucent hand, and waved, a gesture of profound, silent farewell. Her eyes closed again, and the crystalline glow slowly, gradually, faded. The blizzard outside seemed to calm, the wind dying down. Silas finished filling the tank, paid the exact amount, and then, for the first time, he did not immediately return to his car. He looked at Hank, his distant blue eyes now filled with a quiet, profound acceptance. "Her journey continues," he said softly, "but mine is nearly at its end." He paused, looking back at the car. "She was always the engine, you see, the reason for the road." He then turned, slowly, and got back into the Fairmont. It started with its usual impossible silence, and glided away into the still, snow-covered plains, its taillights receding until they vanished into the silent, white expanse. Hank never saw the Fairmont or Mr. Silas again. He still runs Prairie Stop, and the old pump number 6 stands as a silent sentinel. He doesn't know what happened to the perpetual passenger or the man who fueled her. Was she a literal embodiment of the journey itself, a soul needing sustenance from the mundane world to continue an eternal voyage? Or perhaps a person locked in a strange, decades-long stasis, dependent on an unseen energy that mimicked gasoline? The vast, empty plains hold many secrets, and the tale of the woman who consumed fuel remains one of its most enduring. At a sprawling truck stop on the Pennsylvania Turnpike, there was a large, ornate mirror mounted high on the wall of aisle 5, reflecting the endless rows of snacks. But sometimes, when no one was looking directly at it, the mirror showed not the present, but fleeting glimpses of a gas station from a forgotten past. What was the mirror reflecting? And why did its visions seem to predict unsettling events just hours before they occurred? Earl had worked at the Turnpike Oasis for 20 years, a sprawling complex of gas pumps, a diner, and a massive convenience store catering to truckers and travelers alike. He knew every creak of the floorboards, every pattern of the fluorescent lights, and every item on the shelves. In aisle 5, tucked between the jerky and the motor oil, was a large, antique-looking mirror. It was incongruous with the rest of the modern store, its frame carved with swirling patterns, its glass slightly clouded with age. Earl had been told it was a leftover from a previous incarnation of the building, perhaps a forgotten diner from the 1950s. It started subtly. Earl would be restocking shelves in aisle 6, and out of the corner of his eye, catch a glimpse of something odd in the aisle 5 mirror. Not the reflections of the brightly lit store and its current customers, but a fleeting image of something else entirely. It might be a glimpse of an old-fashioned gas pump, with a glass globe on top, or a classic car, perhaps a Ford Model A, pulling up to it. Sometimes it was a man in a wide-brimmed fedora, tipping his hat. When he turned to look directly, the reflection would snap back to the present, showing only the mundane reality of the snack aisle. He dismissed it as tricks of light or tired eyes, but the visions grew clearer, more frequent, and more specific. He started to recognize the pattern. The reflection would show an old gas station, not this modern truck stop. The building was different, older, smaller, and the people reflected were from another era, dressed in clothes from the 1930s or 40s. They were always engaged in ordinary activities, filling a car, talking to an attendant, walking into a small, old-fashioned store. The truly unsettling part began when these glimpses started to subtly predict events. One evening, the mirror briefly showed a flickering image of an old, faded red truck, its hood propped open, billowing smoke. A few hours later, a beat-up red pickup, very similar in model, sputtered into the Turnpike Oasis lot, its engine smoking, forcing its driver to pull over for emergency repairs. Another time, the mirror showed a woman in a long, dark coat clutching a small, yelping dog. Within the hour, a distressed woman, similarly dressed, rushed into the store, frantic about her lost chihuahua, which had indeed gone missing from her car. The correlation was too precise, too frequent to be mere coincidence. Earl, a man who prided himself on his common sense, found himself gripped by an unsettling fascination. He began to experiment. He would leave small, innocuous items near the mirror, like a pen or a stack of napkins, to see if they would appear in the past reflection. They never did. The mirror only showed what seemed to be its own independent temporal window. He noticed that the air around aisle 5 felt strangely cool, even when the rest of the store was warm, and a faint, almost imperceptible scent of gasoline and old leather sometimes lingered in the air. The visions became more vivid, and the faces of the people in the past reflection grew more defined. They weren't random strangers, they were recurring figures. There was the stern-faced attendant in a crisp uniform, a woman with a distinctive red scarf, and a young boy who always seemed to be chasing a stray dog. It was as if the mirror was showing him the regular customers of a past version of his very own gas station. The background details were chillingly specific. An old sign for Pete's roadside stop, a classic Chevy parked at Pump 1, a particular type of wildflower growing by the curb that no longer grew in the area. One particularly foggy night, as the rain lashed against the windows, Earl glanced at the mirror. This time, the image wasn't fleeting. It was clear, almost solid. The reflection showed Pete's roadside stop in a downpour. The stern-faced attendant was trying to secure a loose sign. Then, in a horrific flash, a dark shape, too fast to discern clearly, sped into the reflection, and the image dissolved into a burst of static, like an old television losing its signal. A profound chill settled over the store. The air grew impossibly cold around aisle 5, and the scent of gasoline was strong, acrid. Within minutes, the police sirens wailed in the distance. A severe accident had occurred less than a mile down the turnpike, a head-on collision involving a speeding vehicle and a stationary work truck. The details, when they emerged, were chillingly familiar. A dark, fast car, lost in the fog, had crashed into a utility truck that was securing a damaged road sign. After that night, the mirror changed. It still showed glimpses of Pete's roadside stop, but the images were always quieter, calmer. No more accidents, no more dire predictions. It was as if the mirror had shown him the violent end of its previous existence, a trauma etched into its very being, and now only reflected the peaceful, mundane moments that preceded the tragedy. Earl still works at the Turnpike Oasis. He no longer dismisses the mirror in aisle 5. He knows it is a window, not just to a past gas station, but perhaps to a specific moment in time, a memory imprinted on the very fabric of the building, echoing through its antique glass. Was the mirror a conduit to a fixed point in the past, or was it a living artifact, subtly influencing events by showing them, or even helping them, replay themselves in the present? The answers remain elusive, lost somewhere in the blurred reflections between then and now, forever haunting aisle 5. At a forgotten gas station in rural Arkansas, the air was almost always still, yet during the deepest hours of the night, faint, impossible sounds. A child's laughter, a sputtering engine from a long-lost model, a distant, crackling radio broadcast, would sometimes echo across the empty forecourt. What were these auditory ghosts, and what tragic event had imbued the very ground with such vivid, unsettling memories? Ray, a man who preferred solitude, had bought Ray's quiet stop sight unseen, drawn by the promise of isolation. The gas station was a relic from the 1960s, located on a long-abandoned stretch of highway, far from any major town. It was just a couple of pumps, a small, dusty convenience store, and a profound, pervasive silence. Ray liked the silence. It was broken only by the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves, or the occasional distant rumble of a freight train. Then came the sounds. They began subtly, a faint, almost inaudible whisper on the wind, like a snippet of a forgotten conversation. Ray, a logical man, dismissed it as his imagination or the strange acoustics of the empty landscape. But the sounds grew clearer, more distinct, and utterly baffling. It was always late at night, usually between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., when the station was completely deserted. He'd be inside, doing paperwork, when he'd hear it. The unmistakable sound of a child's laughter, bright and clear, as if a group of children were playing just outside. He'd rush to the window, but the forecourt would be empty, bathed in the dim yellow glow of the security lights. Another night, he heard the distinct, clunking idle of an old Ford Model T engine, followed by a faint, tinny radio broadcast playing swing music, as if a vintage car were idling at Pump 1. He knew there wasn't a Model T within 100 miles, let alone one that could still run. These auditory phantoms were not random. They were specific, localized, and always emanated from the forecourt. The laughter seemed to come from near the old air pump, the Model T's engine from pump 1, and once, a faint, mournful wail, like a crying woman, from the back of the store near the storage shed. Ray searched for natural explanations. Faulty wiring, a strange echo from a distant farm, even local wildlife. He found nothing. The sounds defied physics. They were too clear to be echoes, too specific to be imagination, and too anachronistic to be current. He started keeping a log. He noted the time, the sound, and its apparent source. He realized the sounds were repeating, recurring patterns of specific events. The child's laughter, bright and joyous, was almost always followed by the distinct sound of a squeaky swing set. The Model T's engine would invariably be accompanied by the faint strains of swing music. The crying woman was often followed by the sound of tires screeching to a halt, then a muffled thud. The sheer specificity and repetition of these auditory memories began to chip away at Ray's logical facade. Ray, a man who rarely used the internet, found himself compelled to research the history of Ray's quiet stop. He delved into old local newspapers, dusty county records, and online archives. What he found was chilling. The station, in its earliest iteration, had been called Happy Valley Gas and Grub in the late 1940s and early 50s. It had been a popular stop for families with a small playground out back, complete with a swing set. The Model T sounds aligned with reports of early travelers who often frequented the station. And then he found it, a small, almost forgotten article from 1952. A tragic accident involving a frantic mother, her crying baby, and a speeding car that crashed into the station's storage shed, resulting in multiple fatalities. The article mentioned a squeal of tires and a muffled impact. The station, it seemed, was not just remembering sounds. It was replaying a meticulously detailed, tragic history. The laughter and swing set sounds were the happy memories from the gas station's heyday. The Model T and swing music were from the daily rhythms of that forgotten era. And the wailing woman, the screeching tires, the thud, that was the chilling echo of the 1952 tragedy. The ground beneath the station, it appeared, was not merely earth, but a vast, resonant memory bank. One particularly still night, as the moon cast long shadows across the forecourt, the sounds began again, but this time they were overlapping, clearer, and far more intense than ever before. The children's laughter swelled from the air pump, concurrent with the sputtering of the Model T by pump 1. And then, from the back, the mournful wail of the woman began, growing in intensity. Ray stood frozen in the office, tears inexplicably stinging his eyes. He heard the distinct screech of tires, horrifyingly close, followed by a gut-wrenching metallic thud that seemed to shake the very foundations of the building. The air grew impossibly cold, and he smelled not just dust, but the faint, coppery scent of old blood. Then, as suddenly as they began, the sounds ceased. The silence that followed was profound, absolute, devoid of crickets or wind. It was a silence that spoke of emptiness and loss. Ray stood there, trembling, the scent of copper slowly fading. Ray still runs Ray's quiet stop. The silence has returned, mostly, but sometimes, when the wind is just right, or the moon is full, he still catches a faint whisper of laughter, or a distant, melancholic wail, echoing across the empty forecourt. He no longer sees it as a mere station. He sees it as a silent witness, a sentinel of memory, holding on to the auditory fragments of its past, patiently replaying them for anyone willing to listen. What power allows the ground to remember such vivid details? and to selectively play them back. Is it residual energy, a psychic imprint, or simply a manifestation of the very land's deep, unspoken grief? The quiet stop still holds its secrets, perpetually whispering tales of a time gone by. On a forgotten bypass road through the high desert of New Mexico, far from any major towns, sat Four Corners Gas, a dilapidated station known more for its solitude than its service. But at pump number 4, something far stranger than mere gasoline was sometimes dispensed. Intense, unbidden waves of emotion or vivid, disorienting memories that seemed to rise from the very earth itself. What was truly flowing through that nozzle, and why did it always seem to tap into the deepest secrets of those who dared to use it? Sal, the grizzled, taciturn attendant, had manned Four Corners Gas for 20 years. He was a man of few words, preferring the silent, vast expanse of the desert night to the chatter of humans. His station was a relic, a flickering island of light in an ocean of darkness, frequented only by the truly desperate for fuel or the occasional lost soul taking a wrong turn. He knew the creaks of the old building, the precise hum of the ancient ice machine, and the distinct clatter and whoosh of each of his 4 pumps. But pump number 4 was different. Started subtly years ago, customers using pump 4 would sometimes behave oddly after fueling. A burly trucker, usually stoic, might suddenly sniffle, wiping his eyes before quickly driving off. A young woman, typically focused on her phone, might stare blankly into the distance for a moment, a look of profound sorrow on her face, before shaking it off and driving away. Sal, ever the pragmatist, initially dismissed it as road fatigue or perhaps the strange effects of the desert air. But the pattern grew too consistent, too specific, and the emotions became too intense. One sweltering afternoon, a stern-faced businessman in a pristine suit pulled up to pump 4. He fueled his sleek sedan, then entered the store to pay. As he reached for his wallet, his face contorted, a guttural growl escaping his lips. He slammed his fist on the counter, knocking over a rack of chewing gum. "That lying snake!" he roared, his eyes blazing, though he seemed to be looking through Sal at something unseen. He took everything, everything. He stood there, trembling with rage for a full minute. Then, as quickly as it came, the fury drained from him. He blinked, looked at Sal with mild confusion, mumbled an apology for the gum, and paid, completely unaware of his outburst. Sal felt a prickle of unease. He had seen too many such incidents, too many sudden tears, bursts of laughter, or overwhelming pangs of guilt. The fuel from pump 4 didn't just smell of gasoline. There was a faint, metallic tang to it, almost like ozone, or the scent of an approaching thunderstorm. And the pump itself, though visually identical to the others, sometimes emitted a very low, almost subliminal hum, a thrum that seemed to vibrate in the very pit of Sal's stomach. He began to observe more closely, taking note of who used pump 4 and what followed. He realized the emotions and memories seemed to relate directly to the individual's deepest, often hidden, secrets or unresolved traumas. A man who appeared happy might burst into tears over a lost love. A woman burdened by debt might suddenly feel an overwhelming sense of hope or a terrifying flash of despair. It was as if the fuel wasn't just energy for the car, but a catalyst for the soul, bringing forth whatever lay buried beneath the surface. The mystery deepened when, on a particularly still night, a local prospector, Old Man Jenkins, pulled his beat-up pickup truck to pump 4. Jenkins was known for his tall tales of hidden gold mines. As he fueled, the air around pump 4 grew heavy, almost thick with a palpable tension. Jenkins suddenly gasped, his eyes wide. He dropped the nozzle and pointed wildly at the arid landscape beyond the station. "The canyon!" he shrieked, his voice filled with terror. The flash flood. Sarah. No, don't go there. Sarah. He collapsed against his truck, sobbing uncontrollably. Sal knew Old Man Jenkins had a daughter, Sarah, who had vanished decades ago during a sudden flash flood in a remote canyon, her body never found. It was a local legend, a tragedy that had haunted Jenkins for years. After a few minutes, the old man slowly recovered, looking bewildered. Just a dizzy spell, son, he mumbled, refusing to make eye contact. He paid and left, his eyes still haunted. Sal wondered if the pump wasn't just drawing out emotions, but literally channeling memories, perhaps from the land itself, or the cumulative experiences of all the travelers who had passed this way, leaving a psychic residue behind. The station was, after all, near an ancient trading route traversed for millennia. One night, the hum from Pump 4 became incredibly loud, a resonant thrum that vibrated through the concrete foundations of the station. A young, frantic couple, clearly arguing, pulled up to the pump. As the man, red-faced with anger, grabbed the nozzle, the air around them seemed to shimmer, and a cacophony of voices, faint and overlapping, filled the night. Whispers of betrayal, screams of joy, sobs of loss, a chilling symphony of human emotion. The man at the pump dropped to his knees, clutching his head, tears streaming down his face as he sobbed, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." His girlfriend rushed to him, embracing him tightly as the torrent of emotion seemed to overwhelm him. The shimmering intensified, and for a brief, terrifying moment, Sal thought he saw faint, translucent figures, like heat haze given form, swirling around Pump 4 before dissolving. Then, just as suddenly, the hum ceased, the voices vanished, and the shimmering faded. The couple, shaken but embracing, quietly finished fueling, paid, and drove off, their argument seemingly forgotten, replaced by a profound, if bewildered, understanding. Sal still works at Four Corners Gas, and pump number 4 still hums with its unique resonance. He doesn't know what makes the pump an echo chamber, whether it's the geological properties of the ancient desert, a spiritual wellspring of human experience, or something else entirely. But he has seen enough. He knows he's not just selling gasoline. He's selling a brief, raw encounter with the truth, a fleeting, powerful surge of the past, often painful, sometimes cathartic, fueling not just the journey, but the soul. The desert keeps its secrets, and pump number 4 continues to whisper them, 1 gallon at a time. On the vast, windswept plains of eastern Wyoming, where the sky stretched impossibly wide and the horizon shimmered under a relentless sun, stood Shadow Creek Stop. It was a solitary beacon on a forgotten state road, a place where the nearest town was an hour's drive and silence reigned supreme. Silas, the station's long-term attendant, was a man as much a part of the landscape as the sagebrush and the endless sky. He was quiet, observant, and possessed a peculiar understanding of the subtle distortions in light and the ephemeral nature of things. And he knew with a certainty that transcended logic that sometimes at his station, people left more than just tire tracks behind. They left their shadows. It wasn't every customer, nor every night, but on specific nights, typically during the new moon, or when the sky was choked with thick, heavy clouds, obscuring every star and allowing the station's harsh fluorescent lights to dominate the forecourt, the phenomenon would occur. As a vehicle pulled away, its headlights cutting through the inky blackness, Silas would sometimes see it. A shadow, long and impossibly thin, stretching from where the person had stood, lingering on the asphalt after its owner had departed. It wasn't merely a trick of the light. These shadows had a faint, internal luminescence, a subtle, almost ghostly shimmer, and they seemed to twitch, almost breathe, before slowly, imperceptibly, fading into the dark. Silas had first noticed it years ago, a fleeting anomaly he'd dismissed as exhaustion. But as the occurrences grew more frequent and the shadows more distinct, he realized their true nature. They were not mere optical illusions. They were imprints, energetic residues of human presence, perhaps imbued with fragments of their owner's essence. The very air around these lingering shadows felt different, cooler, somehow denser, and faintly smelling of ozone and old dust. He began to notice a pattern in the people who left them. They were often travelers burdened by a heavy past, or those undergoing a profound transition in their lives. The shadows themselves were not simply outlines. They held subtle details. The hunch of a shoulder from a weary traveler, the tilt of a head from someone lost in thought, the faint outline of an arm reaching for a wallet. They were luminous echoes, shimmering with the faintest light in the absolute dark. What truly fascinated Silas was what happened to the people who left a shadow behind. They never noticed, but he would often see a subtle shift in their demeanor when they came inside to pay. A furrowed brow might relax a fraction. A tense jawline might soften. Some would walk away with a lightness in their step they hadn't possessed moments before. It was as if, in leaving a piece of their past or their emotional weight on the asphalt, they were subtly unburdened. Silas sometimes wondered if they became a little less real, or perhaps just less tied to the things that weighed them down. Silas had, over the years, found a quiet corner in the abandoned garage bay adjacent to the convenience store. Here, the stray shadows would sometimes drift, drawn by some unseen force. He didn't actively collect them, but he observed them, a silent custodian. They would slowly gather, forming a subtle, shifting tapestry on the dusty concrete floor, a faint, luminous mosaic of forgotten moments and relinquished burdens. He never touched them. He instinctively knew they were not meant to be disturbed. One particularly intense night, a violent electrical storm raged on the horizon, painting the sky with silent, blinding flashes. A lone, disheveled figure, clearly in distress, pulled up to a pump. As the man stumbled out of his car, his shadow, long and distorted by the station lights, seemed to writhe on the ground, twisting and stretching like a tortured thing. The man filled his tank, his movements jerky, and as he drove away, his shadow detached completely. It coiled on the asphalt, a luminous, almost liquid pool of light, then slowly began to drift towards the open garage bay. Silas watched, transfixed. This was the most vivid shadow he had ever seen. It pulsed with a contained energy, shimmering with an almost painful brilliance. It was a shadow burdened, full of a raw, churning emotion. As it floated past him, he felt a profound sense of sadness, an echo of deep regret. The man who left it behind paid without a word, his face strangely blank, almost serene, as if a great weight had been lifted, leaving him hollow. Silas never fully understood the luminous shadows of Shadow Creek. Were they remnants of consciousness, fragments of memory drawn out by the stark contrast of light and dark? Or was the station itself, built on some ancient, energetic nexus, subtly absorbing these pieces of human experience, a silent, cosmic custodian of forgotten moments? He still works there, his own presence perhaps a little less solid than it once was, a subtle testament to the secrets the high plains hold. And sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, if you listen closely, and if the light is just right, you might hear a faint, almost imperceptible whisper from the garage bay, a collective sigh of countless burdens shed. On the unending, flat expanse of highway that bisected central Kansas, the horizon stop was less a gas station and more a testament to perseverance against the relentless wind. Its solitary blinking neon sign was often the first flicker of civilization after hours of driving. Maya, a philosophy student working the graveyard shift to save for tuition, found the quiet hours conducive to reading. But her studies were about to be overshadowed by a far more profound and unsettling form of oracle. It began subtly, as anomalies often do. The thermal paper in the old receipt printer had always been a bit temperamental, prone to faint lines or smudges. But one night, as a trucker paid for his diesel, Maya noticed that the blank space at the bottom of his receipt, just below the transaction total, wasn't blank at all. For a fleeting second, a tiny, blurred image materialized there. A faint, indistinct outline of what looked like a roadside diner sign. Before she could properly focus, it faded, leaving the receipt pristine white once more. Maya blinked, shook her head. Exhaustion, she figured. But the next night, it happened again. A family in a minivan heading east. As their receipt slid out, a faint, wispy image formed at the bottom. A single white bird, frozen mid-flight. Within an hour, news crackled over the radio about an unusual flock of snowy owls sighted unexpectedly near Salina, causing traffic delays. Maya felt a shiver. A coincidence? Perhaps. Over the next few weeks, the phenomenon escalated. The images grew clearer, though still brief. They were always mundane, road-related. A tiny, crumpled soda can beside a tire, followed by a customer returning minutes later to report a strange flat. A miniature, perfectly rendered image of a billboard advertising a specific brand of coffee, and the next customer would ask if Maya knew where to find that exact coffee. It was always a detail of their immediate journey, something they would encounter within the next few hours down the road. The clarity lasted only for a few seconds as the paper was still warm from the print head, then faded into nothingness. Maya, an analytical mind, started keeping a secret log, meticulously noting the time, the customer, and the fleeting vision on the receipt. She tried showing a customer one of the images as it formed, but by the time they looked, it was already gone, leaving them only with her bewildered expression. The air around the printer, she noticed, would sometimes grow strangely cool just before an image materialized, and a faint, almost metallic tang, like distant lightning, would fill the air. The burden of knowing began to weigh on her. Most visions were harmless, even amusing, but then the dark ones started. One receipt printed a tiny, incredibly clear image of a deer leaping directly into the path of a speeding car. Maya's heart hammered. The young couple who had bought the gas were already getting into their car. She hesitated, then rushed out. "Excuse me," she called, her voice trembling. "There might be deer tonight. Be extra careful." The couple, puzzled, thanked her politely and drove off. Later that night, a local news bulletin reported a single-car accident involving a deer, exactly where Maya had seen the vision. The couple had been shaken, but largely unharmed, thanks to slowing down. Maya felt a profound mix of relief and terror. Her warning had helped, but what if she hadn't given it? The most terrifying vision came on a particularly stormy night, the wind howling around the station. A beat-up old sedan, its paint peeling, pulled up. An older man, his face etched with worry, came inside to pay. As his receipt emerged, a vivid, horrifying image formed at the bottom. His car, upside down, wheels spinning, on a rain-slicked highway. It was incredibly clear, and it lasted longer than any previous vision, as if insisting on its truth. The air around the printer crackled, and Maya felt a jolt, as if electricity had passed through her. This time, she didn't hesitate. "Sir," she said, her voice urgent, "please don't drive tonight. The roads are terrible. Stay here or find a motel." The man looked at her, startled. Then a flicker of suspicion crossed his face. "What are you on about, girl? I got to get to my daughter." He snatched the receipt, glanced at it. It was already blank again, and hurried out, dismissive. Maya watched him go, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. She called the state patrol, reporting a potentially impaired driver, vague enough to avoid sounding insane. Hours later, the news confirmed her deepest fear. A single vehicle rollover, driver deceased. It was his car. The image on the receipt, she realized with sickening clarity, had shown not a potential future, but an imminent one, a fate that had been irrevocably sealed. The intervention, the warning, had not been enough. Maya still works at the Horizon stop. The receipts still print, occasionally offering their fleeting, prophetic glimpses into the immediate future. The images now seem to carry a heavier weight, a silent testament to the fragile line between fate and choice. She no longer tries to interfere with the most dire predictions. The burden of that knowledge is too great. She simply watches, a silent oracle, forever wondering about the true nature of the thermal paper that shows glimpses of the road ahead. Is it a window into an unchangeable destiny, or a subtle prompt from the universe, offering a glimpse of what might be? If only someone knew how to read the signs. The windswept plains hold many secrets, and the oracle receipts of Horizon Stop remain one of its most profound. At the Mojave Oasis, a remote gas station clinging to life on the dusty fringes of the Mojave Desert, the old self-serve soda fountain didn't just dispense fizzy drinks. For some, it poured fleeting visions, phantom scents, and echoes of distant voices, stirring dreams and nightmares that were never their own. What was truly mixing in its syrup lines, and whose subconscious did it tap? Leo had taken the night shift at the Mojave Oasis specifically for the quiet. He was a young man, perpetually tired, who had fled the relentless noise of city life, yearning for the vast, echoing silence of the desert. The station, a ramshackle collection of fading neon and rusty pumps, was usually deserted during his hours, a solitary island of light in an ocean of darkness. He found the solitude conducive to his own thoughts, a peaceful balm after years of urban clamor. It began subtly. He'd noticed customers pausing after taking a sip from the soda fountain, a strange, faraway look in their eyes. A burly truck driver, known for his stoicism and gruff demeanor, once took a long gulp of root beer, then suddenly erupted into a fit of uncontrolled, childlike giggles, a sound so utterly out of character it startled Leo. The trucker abruptly stopped, his face contorted in confusion, muttering, "What in tarnation?" before shaking his head and moving on. Another night, a woman drinking a cherry cola began to sniffle, a tear rolling down her cheek. "The lilacs," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I can smell them. It's just like home." Leo glanced around the barren desert landscape. There wasn't a lilac bush for hundreds of miles. He dismissed it, attributing it to road weariness or perhaps the peculiar effects of desert dehydration. But the incidents grew too frequent, too specific. Leo started to experiment himself. One slow night, he poured himself a cup of orange soda. As the syrupy liquid hit his tongue, he tasted not the artificial sweetness he expected, but a profound, overwhelming sensation of freedom and speed, as if he were soaring through an impossibly vast blue sky. He instinctively closed his eyes, and for a fleeting second, he saw it. A boundless horizon, a shimmering heat haze, and the unmistakable silhouette of a vintage biplane banking sharply against a brilliant sun. He'd never been in a plane in his life. The sensation vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him with only the mundane taste of orange soda. He tried the grape soda next. A wave of intense anxiety washed over him, a feeling of being utterly lost and alone in a dense, dark forest, the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves filling his nostrils. He recoiled from the machine, a cold dread snaking through him. The effects were transient, lasting only seconds, yet intensely vivid, like waking dreams. Leo started keeping a mental log of the occurrences. He noticed the effects seemed to vary by flavor and by customer. The citrus drinks often brought fleeting moments of exhilaration or clarity. The darker colas sometimes triggered brief flashes of intense anger or sorrow. The air around the machine, he observed, would sometimes grow strangely cool just before a strong brew. And the syrup lines, if he squinted, seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible internal glow. The strength of the brew also varied. It seemed more potent on particularly hot, oppressive nights or during an approaching dust storm. The mystery deepened when, on one sweltering evening, a very old, almost frail woman pulled into the station. Her car looked as ancient as she did, a relic from the mid-20th century. She moved with a slow, deliberate grace, and when she entered, her eyes seemed to take in every detail of the station, as if seeing it through a veil of time. She walked directly to the soda fountain. "A strawberry dream, if you please, young man," she murmured, her voice raspy, yet with an unusual clarity. Leo poured the strawberry soda for her, and, compelled by an irresistible urge, also poured a small cup for himself. As she took a sip, a profound, almost beatific smile spread across her wrinkled face. Leo took a sip of his own. This time, the experience was overwhelming, all-consuming. He wasn't just tasting or smelling. He was there, the station, but younger, bustling, vibrant. Laughter echoed through the office. He saw himself, but as a different person, younger, healthier, serving drinks to customers from a long-gone era. He saw specific customers he now recognized from the phantom tastes and scents. The laughing trucker, the woman with the phantom lilacs, the soaring biplane pilot. He experienced their joy, their fear, their heartbreak, all tied to the station's distant past. He was witnessing a living memory. The old woman looked at him, her eyes holding a deep, knowing, yet melancholic understanding. "The desert remembers," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the phantom sounds filling Leo's mind. "And the fountain, it collects the echoes." She explained that the station, built over an ancient, spiritual spring, somehow channeled the residual emotions and dreams of all who passed through. The soda fountain, through some unknown interaction with its ancient water source or the metallic conduits, acted as a psychic conduit, dissolving these imprints into the very drinks it dispensed. The vision culminated in a fleeting, gut-wrenching glimpse of a profound tragedy that had occurred at the station decades ago. A family, lost in a sudden, violent sandstorm. Their last desperate moments near the station, clinging to one another, filled with despair and a profound, lingering love. He saw a specific couple and realized the faint, lingering scent of specific flowers or a particular, beloved lullaby related to their last moments. The old woman revealed, without prompting, that she was one of the survivors of that family, a child who had been saved, and she often returned to the fountain to remember. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the vision faded. The station was quiet again, save for the hum of the refrigerators. The old woman, her eyes now distant, paid without another word and drove away, vanishing into the night. Leo still works at the Mojave Oasis. He now understands the fountain. It's not just a dispenser. It's a recorder and replayer of human experience, a liquid memory bank, perpetually mixing the bitter and the sweet. He no longer sees his customers as mere transients. He sees them as threads in a vast, unseen tapestry of lives. He occasionally takes a sip from the soda fountain, not for thirst, but to connect, to understand the endless, intertwined lives that pass through the silent, watchful heart of the Mojave. The desert keeps its secrets, and the dream-brewed soda fountain continues to pour its bittersweet, profound truths.